Picture this. You're in the middle of a game, some retro game on a retro doodad, and you're having the time of your life doing some boss battle or something, and then suddenly the low battery icon appears. You're low on battery and your heart sinks as you realize that your gaming session is about to end. It's one of the most terrifying things that can happen to a retro gamer. I have at least 7 nightmares every night about this exact scenario. My therapist says I have unresolved childhood trauma and also I should go outside more often. But she's not a retro gamer, so what the hell does she know? I'm sure I don't need to tell you that the harsh reality of battery anxiety is a real thing. It's like a specter, looming over us while we game, silently judging us while we let our retro doodad sit on the shelf dying slowly, plucking its tongue at us when we choose the wrong charger for whatever device. Just a judgmental specter with nothing better to do than make us feel like we're terrible retro doodad enthusiasts because we don't know the best way to do battery stuff. Well, I'm here to tell you that that specter is a loser. And you shouldn't let him push you around. And I'm going to prove it because I've got the answer to the battery dilemma. I've done all sorts of science and stuff, and I'm going to explain to you exactly how batteries on retro handhelds work in a way that even you can understand. And then I'm going to tell you the best practices for dealing with battery management. Everything from charging your doodads to using them or storing them for extended periods, how to fix battery problems, calibrate and recombobulate them properly. And if I miss anything important, please share your favorite battery life tips and tricks in the comments below. And you better not just go down there and tell me to blow my nose again. I swear, if you tell me to blow my nose, I'm gonna freaking ban you. Wait, you think I'm joking? Try me, bucko.
Hey, TechDweeb, you ever think of just blowing your nose?
Before we get into the actual stuff you should do, we need to talk about how batteries actually work, what makes them tick, what makes them sad, and why they eventually croak. It's time to uncover the secrets of the mysterious power bricks inside your retro handhelds, lithium-ion batteries. So lithium-ion batteries run on the invisible wizardry of chemical reactions. Inside there's 3 main parts: the anode, the cathode, and the electrolyte, which is basically the spooky juice that lets lithium ions move between the anode and the cathode. When you charge the battery, lithium ions get juiced up and move into the anode. And when you use the device, these ions move back into the cathode, and that movement generates the electricity. That's it. It's just ions going back and forth over and over until they don't, because they're out of charge. It's like when your cat walks back and forth from the couch to the cupboard all day hoping for treats and then gives up and goes to sleep on your keyboard. Here's the important part though. Every time those ions do their little dance, the battery's materials wear down a bit. This is called degradation. It's like if you walk up and down the same flight of stairs over and over, eventually they'll wear down and break and you'll fall to your death probably. But here's a cruel twist of fate. Even if you're not using the battery, it still ages. That's called calendar aging. The chemicals that are in a battery are really intense. They're really spicy. And some chemical stuff happens in there just from sitting around, degrading the guts of the battery over time. Either way, eventually 2 things happen to a battery. 1, the battery holds less and less charge over time. And 2, the battery meter starts lying to you. That's why your device might die faster or suddenly drop from 30% to 0%. The battery's internal systems are all out of whack. It's not personal. It's just battery entropy. Even if you treat it like a precious baby, it'll still grow old and cranky, as we all did. But knowing why helps you slow it down. Temperature is another big thing for battery degradation. Heat speeds up the chemical magic going on in the battery, which wears out the battery faster for some reason. The spooky juice gets all gunked up and the lithium ions get all goopy. And eventually the battery can swell or fail. Basically, heat slow cooks your battery's lifespan. Cold, on the other hand, makes the battery sluggish. It doesn't cause permanent damage, but it makes the battery drain faster because it makes the ions move slower and get lazy. Like me after a big lunch. Cold doesn't cause permanent damage like heat does, however, don't charge it while it's freezing. That can cause damage. This might sound grim, but don't panic. Stop panicking. I said don't panic, damn it! It takes a long time for this stuff to matter. And the good news is that there's a ton of easy ways to extend battery life and keep your little power-guzzling buddy happy. Let's start with what is probably the most important thing that every retro doodad owner should know: how to charge the darn thing. You might look at that little hole on your device and think, hey, I know what that's for. Shove in a USB-C cable and plug the other end into the chargey place and boom, you got electricity. But hold it right there. Did you check the voltage on that charging brick? No? Well, congratulations, you're rolling the dice on spicy handheld death. See, with phones, you rarely have to think about this stuff. Phones are smart. They know what kind of voltage is coming in and can regulate it to stay safe. Retro handhelds are not smart. They're dumb, like you. So if you plug in a high voltage charger into a cheap handheld that doesn't know how to handle it, things can go bad. At best, you'll get excess heat, which isn't good. At worst, you'll damage the battery over time. And even worse than worst, you'll get a swollen battery. The dreaded spicy pillow. Or worse than the worstest worst, you'll have a dead handheld. I know, I've done it. Rest in peace, little guy. Seems like I was the dumb one all along. Most devices have charging specs printed on the back. They're all supposed to by law, but lots of Chinese retro piracy device makers don't follow the law for some reason. My advice is to keep a low voltage charger on hand. Anything less than 5 volts, 2 amps, which is 10 watts. That's how you figure out the watts, by the way. Multiply the volts times the amps. Old phone chargers are great for this, or a lower voltage charging hub, like this one here that I use. I'll toss a link to a few of the things that I recommend in the thingy below. As a general rule, if it's a cheap Linux-based handheld, use a weak charger. Even if it can handle more, why risk it? And it's easy to remember. Cheap Linux equals weak juice. Now, if it's an Android handheld or one of the fancier Linux ones, most of those do support smart charging. They'll only take what they can handle. You can use fast chargers with those, no problem, but that said, and this is nerd trivia here, fast charging actually does cause battery degradation over time. Not tons, but a bit. Anything over 18 watts, that counts as fast charging, and if you want maximum battery lifespan, just stick to slow charging, like 10 watts. Personally, I don't bother. My Android handhelds get plugged into my fast chargers, but do as I say, not as I do. Stick to slow charging. And now that we've covered chargers, let's talk about how you use the things. In general, lithium-ion batteries are happiest at around 50% charge. That's where they degrade the slowest over time. I made a super scientific chart here for you. As you can clearly see, at 0% they're sad, near 50% they're happiest, and near 100% they're kind of sad again. Now, don't go panicking. Leaving your battery at 0% or 100% for a while won't instantly kill it, but the longer it stays there, the faster it wears down. That's why you'll often hear this advice: charge to 80%, drain to 20%. It's not always practical, but it's a good target. Some devices like phones or the Steam Deck, they can stop charging at 80% automatically to protect the battery longevity. Retro handhelds can't though. They're not smart enough for that. So if you want to baby the battery when you're charging it, you can unplug it at around 70 or 80% and then use it down to 20%. Kind of stay in the sweet spot, you know? Of course, if you're like me, you're too busy winning arm wrestling contests and attending hot girl conventions to babysit a charging bar, so I usually just charge it up to 100%. But I do try to wait until it drops to 20% before charging it again, and I avoid fully draining it. In my opinion, letting a device sit at 0% is way worse than topping it off to 100%. There is one exception, which is long-term storage. I've got a ridiculous number of retro handhelds, and I'm usually only using about 10 of them at a time. Not like all at once, that would be ridiculous, but at any given time I have like 10 on the go that I cycle between. The rest go into storage, and to be a good battery daddy before I store them, I make sure they're at about 80% charge, and that keeps them in good shape while they sit idle. The way that I make sure this happens is twice a year, once in summer and once in winter, I do a full charge cycle on all my handhelds. I drain to 0%, charge to 100%, and then drain them down to about 80%, and then I shut them off for their long nap. It helps recalibrate the batteries and it keeps them happy during that long-term storage. And speaking of recalibrating, let's talk about that. Battery calibration. It sounds scary, like the batteries are going to recalibrate me into their human slave. But battery recalibration is actually a good thing, unless you want to be a slave, if that's your thing. As your battery degrades over time, your device still tries to measure how much juice it has using an internal meter, a baseline voltage reference, which is stored in the battery controller on your device. And that is called calibration. But as the battery ages, the voltage reference gets out of whack. The device thinks it knows how full the battery is, but it's wrong. That's when weird stuff happens, like it says 30% and then 5 minutes later you're staring at a black screen and crying. Or maybe it stops charging properly because the system doesn't understand the battery's true capacity anymore. The fix is that you need to redo the calibration. Us experts call this recalibrating. It's simple to do. You just gotta fully drain the battery, like all the way down to 0%, and then fully charge it back up to 100%. And that's it. The device will relearn what full and empty actually are, and the battery percentages will be accurate again. You shouldn't do this all the time. For a heavily used handheld, maybe once every 2 to 3 months. For ones you barely use, like once or twice a year is enough. There are 2 exceptions to this method. One is if you're on an Android device, you can actually download recalibration apps that will handle this. They may automate draining and charging your device, which more or less does what we just talked about, but they'll do it for you. And the other exception is that on some devices, the battery is just weird. Powkitty devices are famous for this. The system just loses all concept of the battery, and even recalibrating it doesn't work. So what you gotta do there is to unplug the battery for 10 seconds, which will force a reset on the battery controller. And that might involve you opening up the device to do it, by the way. It's a pain in the buns, but it's what you gotta do on some of the more problematic handhelds. If you ever get a device with a battery that just seems all weird and out of whack, just do the unplug thing. That fixes it most of the time. Now that we've talked habits and hardware, let's get into the stuff that you can actually tweak on the device while you're gaming. The knobs and sliders that help keeps things nice and juicy. And how you do this depends on the device, the operating system, and the chipset. Android handles power differently than Linux. Some systems have built-in power management and others don't. Some chipsets are efficient at low demand and some spike power as soon as you ask too much of them. There's no one-size-fits-all piece of advice here, just a bunch of little decisions that add up. The basic rule is the less demand you put on the system, the less power it'll use. It's simple in theory, I think we all understand this, but it's easy to forget. If you're like me, you like cranking up the enhancements and enabling the fancy features and then kind of forget about them and are left wondering why your battery's running out so quick. For example, the PS1 often ran 3D games at 320 by 240, but emulators like PCSX Rearmed, they can upscale that to 640 by 480 using enhanced resolution. It looks better, yeah, but it also makes your device work a lot harder. It's the kind of thing you set once, thinking you want the best graphics, but then you forget now that you're sucking back more battery juice, and maybe you don't even need it. So be mindful of adding enhancements that you don't actually need. Same thing with shaders. Some of them are really demanding, but even ones that look lightweight, like interpolation shaders, they can be sneaky power hogs. The Pixelate shader is a great interpolation shader. It's very popular, but the Smoober Step shader looks almost the same and it uses way less power. That's the one that I use specifically because of that. And then there's background stuff. For example, retro achievements. That might seem harmless, but it relies on Wi-Fi. It's checking in with the servers, uploading data, constantly comparing your game state, just wasting battery if you don't really care about achievements, really. This is the sort of thing that you want to be aware of. The small things, it all stacks up. Every option you turn on is one more sneaky thing sipping from your battery tank. Like my neighbor who keeps stealing my gas. This one's obvious, but it's still important to bring up. Lighter systems mean longer battery life. Game Boy lasts longer than Game Boy Advance. NES uses less than Super Nintendo. PS1 is easier than PSP. Now, I'm not saying skip Chrono Trigger and play Dragon Warrior just to save power. Play what you want to play, but if you're in a battery sparse situation, maybe that's a good time to tackle your Game Boy backlog, you know? Most modern devices have power modes built into the system. Android-based systems like those from Retroid and Ein and Ioneo, they have power profiles built right in. So use those. Keep the power as low as you can based on what game you need to play. Linux systems often have the same kind of power profiles. They're just kind of tucked away. Front ends like Newly and Batocera have built-in power settings. And then you can set per system power modes too. For example, you can play Sega Genesis on the power saver profile to get a lot more game time there, and put Dreamcast into the max performance profile to get the smoothest gameplay there. And some firmware options go deeper than that. Screen auto dimming and sleep timers, quick suspend and resume features. Newly does this, and so does Onion OS. You can shut the device off mid-game, and when you boot it back up, it'll boot right back into your game. There are also power saving tricks at the hardware level. Turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth when you don't need them. Even idle, they're always poking around, scanning and syncing and wasting battery. Turn off Rumble if you don't care about that, and lower your volume. Louder sound means more power needed. No one talks about this, but any kid who grew up in the 90s knows what I'm talking about. If you crank that boombox, you're gonna burn through D batteries real quick. And finally, the biggest game changer of them all is the screen brightness. This one's huge. Apart from maybe the games you choose to play, most of your battery drain comes from the screen brightness. Depending on what you're playing, if you lower it to under 50%, you can almost double your battery life compared to 100%. I'm serious. Especially for low-end emulation where the CPU's not doing much. Screen brightness is the #1 factor. So I mean, just set it as low as you can tolerate. Your eyes will adapt. Be brave. Dim your way to battery freedom. And there's more we could talk about. External battery packs, custom firmwares with different battery options. Sometimes you can tweak the clock speeds, sleep mode stuff on Android, which charger is best for which handheld, using darker front-end themes and wallpaper, Android apps that help manage power. The rabbit hole goes deep, but we've covered the most important stuff. You got all the big tools now. So go forth, my sweet retro child, and live a life unfettered by battery anxiety. You can go back to worrying about more important things, like why you still remember your GeoCities password but not your mom's birthday. And that's it from me. Do you have a battery tip? Drop it in the comments and let's build the ultimate retro battery knowledge vault down there in the comments. Click the thumbs up button if you like the video, and may your battery carry you through this life and beyond. That came out wrong. I'm not saying you're gonna die. Even though you are. We all die, eventually. We're not so different from handhelds, if you think about it. And on that lovely thought, I'm TechDweeb, thanks for watching, bye-bye!